The rain in the northern borderlands did not wash things clean. It turned the dust into the color of dried liver. 10-year-old Xiaoju did not look at the rain. He looked at his hands. They were small, the fingernails split and caked with the dark, thick mud of the stables. But right now, something else was slicking his palms. Beside him, the village blacksmith's second cousin lay face down in the straw. The man's heavy breathing had stopped 3 minutes ago, right after Xiaoju had driven a rusted iron shear through his throat. The man had smelled of sour wine and garlic, his large, greasy hands tearing at Xiaoju's ragged tunic, whispering things that made the boy's blood turn to liquid ice. Xiaoju hadn't cried. He had simply reached for the nearest heavy object, his mind going perfectly, terrifyingly blank. The door of the stable creaked open. The grey light of the storm spilled over a pair of heavy leather boots, completely untouched by the local mire. Xiaoju did not run. He gripped the bloody iron shears tighter, his small body shaking, his eyes wide and unblinking like a trapped feral cat. The man standing in the doorway was large, wrapped in a dark silk cloak that absorbed the light. His face was scarred near the jawline, his eyes carrying the weight of 100 deaths. This was Master Lin Jin, the long-toothed dragon head of the Black River Syndicate, a shadow network that controlled every river dock, gambling den, and salt smuggling route from the capital to the border. He had come to the village to collect a debt from the village head, only to find something far more valuable in the mud. Lin Jin looked at the dead man. Then he looked at the 10-year-old boy who hadn't dropped his weapon. "Did he hit you?" Lin Jin asked. His voice was like grinding stones. Xiaoju didn't speak. He just tightened his knuckles on the shears. A slow, terrible smile crept onto the syndicate boss's face. He walked forward, completely ignoring the bloody weapon, and extended a large, calloused hand. "A wolf cub doesn't belong in a sheep pen. Come with me, boy. I will teach you how to bite so they never get back up." 7 years did not pass in the Black River Syndicate. They were forged. The training grounds of the Syndicate's hidden mountain fortress were designed to break human spirits or turn them into diamond. Xiaoju was given a new name, Lin Feng, and placed into a courtyard with 2 other boys, Ochuan, an orphan who had survived by eating coal in the southern mines, and Han Sheng, the silent son of a disgraced, executed executioner. They were not taught the elegant, flowing martial arts of the imperial academies. They were taught how to kill with 3 inches of steel, how to survive a poisoned blade, and how to use their bare hands to crush a man's windpipe in total silence. For the first 3 years, they were forced to fight each other every week for a single bowl of white rice. If one fell, the other two had to beat him until he crawled. It was meant to make them hate each other, to ensure they trusted no one. But the Syndicate had miscalculated. The shared cruelty did not divide them. It fused them into a single, multi-headed beast. When Lin Feng was 12, he took a whip lashing meant for Ochuan when the latter failed to memorize a poison ledger. That night, inside the dark stone cell where they were locked, Ochuan had used his own saliva and torn cloth to clean Lin Feng's bleeding back, while Han Sheng stood guard at the iron bars, his teeth bared at the dark. "If we die together," Ochuan had whispered, his hands trembling but his eyes fierce. "If we live, we break the cage." By 17, Lin Feng had become the Syndicate's most terrifying shadow. He was not the largest, but he was the most efficient. His movements were terrifyingly quiet, his eyes devoid of the youthful warmth expected of a teenager. Ochuan had grown into a sharp-eyed, meticulous strategist who managed the Syndicate's secret account books, while Han Sheng was a towering, heavy-shouldered force who could handle any blade with clinical precision. They were a trinity. Lin Feng was the edge, Ochuan was the mind, and Han Sheng was the shield. The illusion of their world shattered on a dry autumn morning. A convoy of heavily guarded, gold-trimmed carriages arrived at the base of the mountain fortress. They did not bear the black flags of rival triads, but the purple and gold banners of the Marquis of Ningyuan, one of the founding noble houses of the great Liang Empire. Inside the fortress's main hall, Lin Jin sat on his ironwood throne, watching a middle-aged man in pristine, embroidered silk robes pacing the floor. This was the chief steward of the Marquis's estate. "We have checked the imperial records, the birthmarks." and the testimony of the midwife we extracted from the northern border. The steward said, his nose wrinkled in disgust at the smell of old blood and iron in the hall. The boy you brought here 7 years ago. He is the legitimate eldest son of the Marquis of Ningyuan. He was stolen by bandits during the chaos of the succession struggle. The current youth living in the Marquis's estate is a substitute. A fake. Lin Feng stood hidden in the rafters above, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his short blade. His expression didn't change as he heard the news of his noble birth. To him, the Marquis of Ningyuan was just a name on a target list of corrupt officials. When the steward left, demanding that the boy be delivered to the capital's gates within 3 days, Lin Feng dropped silently from the ceiling. I am not going. Lin Feng sighed, his voice flat. My name is Lin. I belong to the Black River. Lin Jin, the fearsome dragonhead who had never bowed to any official, looked at his adoptive son. The old boss looked tired. The gray in his beard seemed heavier today. You are going, Funga, Lin Jin said quietly. Father, listen to me. Lin Jin slammed his hand on the armrest, the wood cracking under the blow. He stood up, his heavy steps echoing in the empty hall. He walked down to Lin Feng and placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. For the first time in 7 years, Lin Feng saw something like desperation in the old man's eyes. The hideout is a dead end, Funga, Lin Jin whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion he had spent a lifetime suppressing. Look at me. I control 3 provinces from the shadows, yet if the imperial court sends a division of the army, my head will hang from the city gates by morning. Your brothers, Achuan and Han Sheng. They are brilliant, but they are branded as thugs. If you stay here, you will die with a knife in your back before you are 30. The old boss's grip tightened, his fingers digging into Lin Feng's muscles. The Marquis's estate is a nest of vipers, yes, but that identity, that legal bloodline, it is an armor made of gold. If you take that title, the law cannot touch you. The magistrates cannot arrest you without an imperial decree. You will have the power to walk in the daylight. Suddenly, the ruthless mafia boss dropped his weight, his knees hitting the stone floor. He was kneeling before the boy he had raised. Father. Lin Feng tried to pull him up, but the old man anchored himself. I am begging you, Lin Jin said, looking up with bloodshot eyes. Go to the capital, take their name. Secure your legal status. Once you are untouchable in the light, you can pull your brothers out of the mud. Do this for the Black River. Do this for your future. Lin Feng stared at the old man. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. He didn't care about the Marquis, or to wealth or his biological mother. But he cared about the man who had given him a knife when he was 10 and told him to survive. I will go, Lin Feng said softly. But I go on my own terms. 2 days later, the massive, dark iron gates of the capital loomed before them. Lin Feng rode a black stallion, dressed in a simple, unadorned dark robe that masked the high-grade leather armor beneath it. He wore no jewelry, no noble headpiece. His hair was tied back with a simple leather strap. Behind him, hidden among the merchants and travelers entering the city, were Achuan and Han Sheng. They had not been invited, but they would never let him enter the slaughterhouse alone. As the carriage from the Marquis's estate waited to receive him at the outer gate, Lin Feng stopped his horse. He narrowed his eyes, surveying the city walls. He wasn't looking at the grandeur of the architecture. He was mapping the height of the battlements, calculating the reaction time of the city guards, and identifying the blind spots in the crowded streets. His biological family expected a broken, traumatized village boy eager for a mother's embrace and a father's wealth. They expected a victim who would weep at their feet for the years he had lost. Lin Feng let out a cold, silent bray at his hand, lightly brushing the twin daggers concealed inside his wide sleeves. The wolf had left the mountain, and he was entering the sheep pen with his teeth bared. The Marquis of Ningyuan's estate was a labyrinth of carved white jade, manicured pine trees, and suffocating etiquette. For 3 weeks, Lin Feng had moved through its corridors like an unwelcome phantom. Te Kayedim Sur, the long-lost master Banin, fell victim shroud. His biological mother, Madame Su, could rarely look him in the eye without flinching at the coarse calluses on his hands. His two sisters, Rua and Kinna, treated him like an unpredictable, feral animal brought in from the wilderness, constantly contrasting his silent, rigid posture with the refined, poetic elegance of Su Wai the fake son. Su Wai was a creature of silk and perfume. He had spent 17 years perfecting the art of the filial, golden child, and he did not intend to let a gutter-born barbarian displace him. The trap sprung on a humid afternoon at the lakeside pavilion. Madame Su was sipping chrysanthemum tea, flanked by her daughters, while Su Wai stood near the marble balustrade, ostensibly showing Lin Feng a rare, antique fan. "Brother," Su Wai murmured, his voice pitched perfectly so only Lin Feng could hear the venom beneath the gentle tone. "You look so uncomfortable in those silks. A wild dog can wear a collar, but it will never be a guardian crane." Lin Feng didn't blink. His posture remained perfectly still, his eyes tracking the slight tremor in Su Wai's fingers. He knew a feint when he saw one. Suddenly, Su Wai threw himself backward. With a theatrical gasp, he clipped the edge of the low marble railing and plunged directly into the deep, dark waters of the estate pool. Splash. Ah. "Help, brother, why?" Su Wai surfaced instantly, thrashing violently, his face a mask of terrified innocence. "I only wanted to share the fan. Why do you hate me so much?" "Warrior," Madame Su shrieked, dropping her porcelain cup. It shattered on the stone floor. Heavens! Someone save him! The savage pushed him. "Guards!" Rua and Kinna rushed to the edge, screaming in panic, pointing trembling fingers at Lin Feng. "You monster! How could you be so cruel to your own brother?" Lin Feng did not offer a defense. He did not plead, rage, or look shocked. A cold, terrifying sneer slowly split his face, his eyes locking onto the thrashing figure in the water. In a flash of fluid, terrifying speed, Lin Feng vaulted over the marble balustrade. He didn't dive. He dropped like a stone hawk striking its prey. He broke the surface, the cold water enveloping his silk robes. Su Wai's eyes widened in genuine horror as he saw Lin Feng swimming directly toward him, completely unbothered by the heavy fabric. Before the fake son could scream again, Lin Feng's hand shot out, wrapping tightly around Su Wai's meticulously styled hair. With a brutal yank, Lin Feng dragged Su Wai through the water, hauling him toward the stone embankment. He threw the gasping, choking boy onto the hard marble tiles like a landed fish. Lin Feng hauled himself up, water dripping from his dark hair, his clothes clinging to his lean, muscled frame. He stepped over the shivering, weeping Su Wai and looked down at him. "If you want to frame me for pushing you," Lin Feng sighed, his voice dropping into a lethal, low register that vibrated through the pavilion. "Let me show you what it actually looks like." He planted his boot squarely on Su Wai's chest, pinning him to the stone. With a swift, merciless motion, Lin Feng leaned down, grabbed Su Wai by the collar, and began to beat him. Crack, crack. The sounds of flesh striking bone echoed across the quiet lake. Lin Feng's fists were precise, underworld-honed weapons. He broke Su Wai's nose, shattered his jaw, and left him coughing up blood on the pristine white jade. "Stop, stop it, you animal!" Madame Su wailed, clutching her chest, nearly fainting. "Guards! Kill him! Kill this madman!" A dozen elite estate guards, swords drawn, came sprinting down the winding covered walkways, led by the Marquis himself, who had rushed from his study at the commotion. Audacious thug. "Unhand him!" the Marquis roared, his face purple with fury. Lin Feng didn't look up until the first 3 guards closed the distance. The battlefield was his natural element. The elegant, noble estate suddenly transformed into the brutal iron cages of his youth. As the first guard lunged with a straight sword, Lin Feng sidestepped the blade by an inch. His hand shot out, gripping the guard's wrist. With a sickening snap, he inverted the joint, breaking the radius bone cleanly, and ripped the sword from the man's failing grasp. He didn't use the blade to fence, he used it to maim. Lin Feng spun into the crowd of guards like a hurricane of black silk and cold steel. He didn't play by the rules of imperial martial arts. He ducked beneath a sweeping strike, drove his elbow into a guard's throat, and shattered the kneecap of another with a low, vicious kick. Limbs snapped. Blood sprayed against the white marble pillars. The two sisters screamed, covering their ears, while Madame Sue fell to her knees, weeping in pure, unadulterated terror at the sheer efficiency of the violence. The Marquis's elite guards, men who had fought in border skirmishes, were being systematically dismantled by a 17-year-old boy who hadn't even broken a sweat. "Stand down!" the Marquis shouted, his voice trembling as he realized his men were being slaughtered. "Sewer, stop this madness!" Lin Feng stood amidst the groaning, bleeding bodies of 8 guards. He dropped the borrowed sword. The silence that followed was suffocating, punctuated only by the weak, wet gurgling of Su Wai, who was crawling toward the Marquis, trailing a smear of blood behind him. "Father," Su Wai wheezed, stretching out a blood-soaked hand. Save me." Lin Feng looked at the fake son. In a movement so fast it defied the eye, his hand reached into his wide, wet sleeve. Seeing, a short, curved hideout blade appeared in his grip. Lin Feng stepped forward, bypassed the Marquis before the older man could even raise his hands, and drove his boot onto Su Wai's back, pinning him to the ground one last time. With a cold, mechanical stroke, Lin Feng pulled Su Wai's head back by the hair and slashed his throat. A dark crimson arc sprayed across the white jade balustrade, dripping directly into the clear lake water below. Su Wai's body convulsed once, twice, and then went entirely still, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. Lin Feng flicked the blood off his blade with a sharp snap of his wrist. He looked directly at the horrified, frozen faces of his biological family. Now, Lin Feng whispered, his eyes void of any human warmth. "The accusation fits the crime." The Marquis of Ningyuan's estate became a tomb. The Marquis immediately tried to call for the capital garrison, but Lin Feng had anticipated the move. On the first night, any servant or messenger who attempted to leave the estate boundaries was found bound, gagged, and broken at the gates, dumped back into the courtyard as a silent warning. Lin Feng barricaded himself in the primary guest courtyard, the finest pavilion on the estate. He didn't lock the doors. He left them wide open. On the first night, a faction of loyal family shadowguards tried to infiltrate the room to assassinate him in his sleep. They never made it past the threshold. The family woke the next morning to find senior guards hanging by their ankles from the courtyard rafters, their fingers broken, groaning in agony. For 3 days, Lin Feng walked the estate like a ghost. He wore clean clothes he took from the family's stores. He ate their finest food, sitting alone at the head of the dining hall while the servants trembled so violently they dropped the platters. He did not speak to his mother or sisters. He didn't need to. If he walked down a corridor and met Rua or Kinna, he would simply stop and stare at them. The sheer, suffocating killing intent radiating from his dark eyes was enough to send them collapsing to the floor, weeping in paroxysms of pure terror. Madame Sue locked herself in her bedchamber, convinced that every creak of the floorboards was her real son coming to claim her life. He had reduced a proud, noble house to a weeping wreck in 72 hours. On the third morning, the Marquis, broken and desperate, brought the High Magistrate of the Capital Court and a contingent of imperial soldiers into the main hall. They thought numbers would give them courage. Lin Feng was already sitting in the Patriarch's high chair, sipping tea. Beside him stood a stack of ancient, dusty ledgers he had unearthed from the estate's secret study during his nightly wanderings. "Lin Feng!" the Marquis shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and fury. "Your reign of terror ends today. The High Magistrate is here to arrest you for the murder of Su Wai and treason against your own blood." Lin Feng didn't look up from his tea. He tapped the stack of ledgers. "High Magistrate," Lin Feng said smoothly, "before you execute an arrest, perhaps you would like to examine these. They contain the record of the Marquis of Ningyuan's secret iron smuggling routes to the northern tribes from 5 years ago. A crime that carries the penalty of 9-generational extermination, if I recall correct." The Marquis's face drained of all color. He staggered backward, his breath catching in his throat. "You! How did you?" I was raised by the Black River Syndicate, Father, Lin Feng said, the word dripping with mockery. We know how to find the rot in any house. Lin Feng stood up and drew a crisp, heavy sheet of parchment from his robe. He threw it onto the table. It was an official Hui Guan Si Chi. Sign it, Lin Feng commanded. You will state that I, Lin Feng, am dead to your lineage. You will strip my name from the ancestral books. You will certify that we share no blood, no debt, and no future. If you sign, the ledgers stay here. If you refuse, the Crown Prince will have the papers for sundown. The Marquis looked at the High Magistrate, who was carefully looking away, wanting no part in a treason scandal. Trembling, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the brush. The Marquis dipped it in red ink and pressed his family seal onto the document. Lin Feng snatched the paper, checking the seal. Satisfied, he folded it neatly and tucked it into his breast pocket. He didn't look back at the weeping figures of his sisters, who stood at the edge of the hall, or his broken biological father. He walked out of the grand gates of the Ningyuan estate, the heavy iron doors groaning shut behind him. The legal, elite status was his. The noble bloodline could never be used to chain him, and the law could never drag him back. He was completely, beautifully free. The autumn wind off the Capel's Guanal smelled of salt, rotith, timber, and cheap liquor. At the southern docks of the Tongzhu ward, a massive wooden warehouse loomed over the Blackwater. Painted across its heavy pine doors was a new seal, the Sanyuan Freight Consortium. To the casual observer, it was just another commercial guild managing the influx of southern grain. To the capital's underworld, it was a declaration of war. Armed with the secret startup capital provided by their adoptive mafia father, Lin Jin, and legitimized by Lin Feng's bulletproof, legally verified noble identity, the three brothers had established a massive maritime and overland logistics network. They were building an empire in the daylight. But the dark does not wash off easily. Inside the warehouse's private quarters, away from the prying eyes of clerks and dockworkers, a single brazier burned. Here, behind heavy oak doors, the terrifying facades they wore for the world crumbled away. Han Sheng sat on a low wooden bench. His massive shirt removed as Ochuan carefully applied a pungent herbal salve to a jagged silver scar running from the big man's shoulder down to his ribs, a memory of an iron hook ambush from their 13th year. Lin Feng sat cross-legged across from them, turning a simple wooden stick over in his hands, a genuine, soft smile gracing his face as Ochuan cracked a dry joke about a merchant who had tried to bribe them with a crate of sour lychees. In this room, they laughed. In this room, Lin Feng's eyes held the warmth of a boy who loved his family. They shared a single, roasted duck from a communal clay pot, teasing Han Sheng about his bottomless appetite, pulling each other close in a fierce, silent declaration of survival. They were a trinity. Lin Feng was the edge, Ochuan was the mind, and Han Sheng was the shield. Suddenly, a heavy iron chain rattled outside on the docks as a cargo crane lowered a crate. Clang, clang. The laughter died instantly. Han Sheng froze, his eyes dilating into a hollow, dead stare. His breathing stopped, his massive shoulders locking up as his mind violently flashed back to the dark stone cells of the mountain fortress where the syndicate had chained him for weeks as a child. The jar of salve slipped from Ochuan's hands, shattering on the floor. Ochuan didn't notice. His own right hand had already vanished into his boot, his fingers gripping a hidden, razor-sharp throwing blade. His knuckles white, his chest heaving in a blind panic. Lin Feng didn't flinch. He dropped the wooden stick and moved with grounding, quiet, deliberate speed. He placed one hand firmly over Ochuan's trembling fingers, pulling them away from the blade. With his other hand, he grabbed Han Sheng's thick wrist, squeezing hard. Sheng Ge Chuan look at me, Lin Feng commanded softly, his voice dropping into a steady, rhythmic cadence. Look at the fire. The chains aren't for us anymore. We are out. We are in the capital. Minutes ticked by in the suffocating silence until Han Sheng's heavy chest finally dropped, a long, shuddering breath escaping his lips. Ochuan slumped against the table, wiping cold sweat from his forehead. They were haunted. They were 17 years old, and they were profoundly broken. Ochuan could not close his eyes at night unless his fingers were wrapped around a hilt. Hansheng was paralyzed by the sounds of captivity, and Lin Feng simply did not sleep. For 3 days straight he had stayed awake, pacing the perimeter of the warehouse, in the dead of night, his mind trapped in a loop of deeply ingrained paranoia, waiting for an assassination attempt that never came. "We are building this clean," Ochuan said hours later, his voice tight as he swept up the broken porcelain from the salve jar. "No protection money, no opium, no human trafficking. I banned our carts from carrying anything that breathes. We handle disputes through contracts now, Fenga. I want us to be honest businessmen." "We are trying," Lin Feng murmured, looking out the narrow window at the dark river. It was a desperate shift, born of sheer exhaustion from the mindless cruelty of the hideout life. But the capital's criminal underworld refused to let them go. To the local triads. The Sanyuan Consortium was an existential threat, a rogue entity refusing to pay bribes to the local syndicate bosses. Just 2 nights prior, a rival gang had ambushed one of their overland spice convoys, murdering a civilian driver and setting fire to the wagons. Lin Feng and Hansheng had been forced to hunt the perpetrators down in a rain-slicked alleyway. Protects de fragile empire. They had been forced to revert to their old ways, leaving for severed heads on the steps of the local triad's gambling den as a warning. They were trapped in a horrifying paradox. They desperately wanted to be legitimate, but the world only recognized the language of blood. The high society merchants called them thugs. The street gangs called them targets. They were drowning in the mud they were trying so hard to escape. The turning point arrived under the cover of a freezing winter midnight. A single, unadorned black carriage stopped outside the warehouse. A man wrapped in a plaid stepped and sang. When the hood fell back, it revealed the sharp, regal features of Li Jing, the crown prince of the great Liang Empire. Lin Feng did not bow. He stood before the future emperor, his hand resting casually near his sleeve. "Your Highness comes to a wharf at midnight. If the left chancellor's spies see you, your throne is forfeit. The chancellor's spies do not control the docks." "You do," the crown prince said, his voice calm, assessing the 3 heavily armed youth before him. Li Jing did not look at them with the typical aristocratic disgust Lin Feng had grown to expect from his birth family. Instead, the prince looked at them with a profound, calculating respect. "I have watched your consortium for 3 months," the prince continued, stepping closer to the brazier. "You refuse the black market. You protect your workers. You fight the local triads. Yet the ministries brand you as common criminals. You are fighting a war you cannot win alone, Lin Feng." The prince extended a heavy, jade-sealed scroll. "I am battling a corrupt court faction that is systematically bleeding the empire's military funds. The Imperial Guard is compromised. I cannot trust my own shadow. I do not want to exploit you. I want to offer you an alliance. Provide me with the shadow, intelligence of this city, the secrets that pass through your boats, your couriers, your informants. Help me purge the traitors." Lin Feng's eyes narrowed. "And what do 3 thugs get in return?" "True, state-sanctioned legitimacy," the crown prince said firmly. "Imperial commissions, a path out of the shadows. I will grant your consortium exclusive imperial transport licenses that no magistrate can revoke. I will give your brothers official standing in the realm. I am offering you a sky where you can finally breathe without looking over your shoulders." For Ochuan and Hansheng, the words were like a breath of life to a dying man. It was a miracle. It wasn't just a political contract. It was the ultimate lifeline to extricate themselves from the hideout mud forever. Lin Feng looked at his brothers, saw the desperate, silent hope in their eyes, and turned back to the prince. He took the scroll. "Shall belongs to you, Your Highness. Give us the light." The alliance was a masterclass in lethal efficiency. Over the next 6 months, the Sanyuan Consortium became the Crown Prince's invisible scalpel. Armedwit Ochuans meticulously managed each intelligence networks. The prince systematically dismantled the corrupt faction, arresting 12 senior ministers in a series of flawless midnight raids. But the final, most devastating blow was struck when Lin Feng and his brothers personally raided the secret country villa of the disgraced left chancellor. Deep within a hidden vault behind a stone brick wall, Ochuan broke open an encrypted iron lockbox. Inside were private, decades-old correspondences bearing the personal seal of a hostile, northern, rebel clan and the specific. Horrific details of a mole placed inside the capital. Ochuan's face turned completely bloodless as he deciphered the text. He staggered back against a crate, his chest heaving, his fingers trembling violently as he handed the parchment to Lin Feng. "Feng, look at the names, look at the dates. It's about the house you left." Lin Feng read the letters, his eyes turning into chips of black ice. The documents detailed a massive 20-year conspiracy. Su Wai the darling, refined, fragile fake son whom the Marquis and Madame Su had doted on for 17 years was never a random orphan chosen to fill a void. He was the biological bastard child of a high-ranking northern traitor, deliberately planted into the Marquis's household during a chaotic border succession struggle. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its malice. Su Wai had been trained from toddlerhood to manipulate the family, engineered to eventually inherit the Marquis's noble title and ancestral wealth while secretly funneling the family's military supply routes, estate funds, and imperial land deeds directly to the empire's enemies. Most sickeningly, the letters revealed that a 17-year-old Su Wai had personally coordinated with northern bandits to ensure that the real son Lin Feng was kidnapped and abandoned at birth, eliminating the true bloodline to protect his position as the viper in their nest. The innocent, golden child had been systematically bleeding the family dry, laughing at them while they knelt by his side. The next morning, an imperial thunderbolt shattered the capital. By direct decree from the Crown Prince, the deceased Su Wai was officially branded a Level 1 traitor to the state. Imperial executioners marched into the Ningyuan ancestral temple, dragged Su Wai's spiritual tablet out into the street, smashed it into splinters, and burned it over a pile of animal filth. Because Su Wai had legally signed away the family's major estate assets to his secret northern handlers before his death, the imperial court immediately seized 80% of the Marquis of Ningyuan's remaining wealth as restitution for treasonous negligence. The financial downfall of the noble house was absolute, but the psychological ruin was a living hell. Inside the freezing, stripped main hall of the Ningyuan estate, the Marquis sat paralyzed on the floor, surrounded by imperial seizure tags and broken porcelain. Madame Su was weeping so violently she choked on her own breath, her fingers tearing at her own hair as the truth tore through her mind like wildfire. "We killed our own guards for him," she wailed, her voice a ragged, broken shriek that echoed off the empty walls. "We threw away our real son, our own flesh and blood. A boy who survived the dark. We called him a savage. We called him a monster. He wasn't murdering a brother," Rua whispered, her face hollow, her eyes staring blankly at the white jade pavilion where Su Wai's blood had once drained into the lake. "He was executing a spy. He was killing the traitor who stole his life and ruined our house. He tried to show us the iron smuggling ledgers, and we screamed at him. We brought the magistrates to hunt him down." Kinna, the youngest sister, rocked back and forth in the corner, clutching her knees, her voice a broken whimper. "He knew. He saw the rot from the moment he walked in. He tried to clean the house, and we drove him out with curses." De Reali said, with a horror that burned deeper than physical branding, that the savage they had feared and despised was the only pure, fiercely loyal protector their bloodline had ever produced. He had returned to them because his adoptive father had begged him to find a legitimate home, and they had met him with disgust, forcing him to sign the red seal of severance. Now, their wealth was gone, their reputation was ash, and the son who was currently rising to the right hand of the emperor was completely, beautifully, and irrevocably separated from them by their own design. The winter of the third year of the Crown Prince's regency arrived with a fierce, blinding blizzard that choked the capital in white. Yet, despite the biting frost, the main thoroughfare of the city, the Imperial Vermilion Avenue, was packed tens of deep with thousands of cheering citizens. The northern borders had been secured. The rogue rebels, who had brutally slaughtered the border village, had been completely eradicated. Hunted down through freezing mountain passes by a specialized, terrifyingly efficient task force. The capital itself was safe, its underground rings dismantled, its streets cleared of the violent gangs that had once preyed on the weak. At the head of the triumphant Imperial vanguard rode the newly appointed commander of capital security. Lin Feng sat atop a massive, coal-black warhorse. He wore the glittering, heavy iron and gold plate armor of a high-ranking military official, a heavy crimson cloak snapping in the freezing wind behind him. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding stoicism, his dark eyes fixed forward on the towering gates of the imperial palace. He looked every bit the legendary folk hero the city was screaming for, a terrifying Volf to the wicked, but an unbreakable shield to the innocent. Riding closely at his left flank was Achuan, dressed in the sleek, deep purple robes of the chief imperial logistics advisor, his sharp eyes surveying the crowd with calculating precision. At his right flank rode Han Sheng, a massive, towering figure in matching heavy vanguard armor, his broad shoulders relaxed, his hand resting comfortably on the hilt of a massive broadsword. They did not look like thugs anymore. They did not look like the broken, traumatized boys who had shivered in a dark mountain fortress or panicked at the sound of rattling chains. Legitimized by the crown prince, they had dragged themselves out of the hideout, mud by their own blood and teeth. They were imperial lords now, walking in the absolute fullness of the daylight. At the very edge of the crowded avenue, huddled beneath the freezing eaves of a dilapidated tea-house, stood three women wrapped in tattered, faded wool shawls. Madame Su shook violently, her lips blue from the cold, her thin hands clutching a beggar isse wooden bowl. Beside her, Rua and Kinna stood with hollow cheeks and red, tear-streaked eyes. The past 2 years had been a relentless descent into hell for the Ningyuan remnants. Stripped of 80% of their ancestral wealth by the imperial treason seizure. Their name dragged through the dirt because of the monster Su Wai, they had been cast out of high society. The Marquis had passed away a broken, disgraced man months ago, leaving them completely destitute. They lived in a cramped, drafty shack in the slums, constantly terrified of the debt collectors and rogue street thugs who now ruled their neighborhood. Madame Su stared through the gaps in the cheering crowd, her eyes locking onto the towering figure on the black horse. The breath caught in her throat. Her heart squeezed with a pain so sharp, she nearly collapsed into the slush. There he was, her biological son, the child she had carried, the boy whose rough calluses she had looked at with disgust, the savage she had tried to have arrested. He was magnificent. He was a protector of the empire, walking arm in arm with royalty. Funga, Madame Su whispered, a desperate, hysterical sob breaking from her chest. Look at him. That's my son. That's our blood. Mother, he's coming this way. Kinna whimpered, her hands trembling as she pulled at her mother's ragged sleeve. Look at the armor. He saved the capital. He did everything he said he would. But phoned. Crushing remorse, realization so heavy it felt like swallowing glass shattered what little pride they had left. They had traded a dragon for a viper. They had thrown away the only true savior their house had ever produced. And now they were starving in the mud while he ruled the sky. Desperation breeds madness. As the front line of the cavalry passed their section of the avenue, Madame Su, driven by a sudden, frantic hope, broke past the imperial line guards. Rua and Kinna followed, stumbling into the snow-packed street, falling directly to their knees in the path of the oncoming warhorses. Funga! Funga! Wait! Madame Su shrieked, throwing her hands into the air, her face wet with freezing tears. Look at your mother. Please, look at us. The vanguard cavalry ground to a halt, the heavy hooves of the horses throwing up clods of dark mud and ice. The crowd's cheers faltered, turning into a low, confused murmur. Lin Feng pulled back on the reins. His warhorse stopped precisely 3 paces away from the kneeling women. Funga, we were wrong. Madame Su wailed, bowing her head repeatedly into the dirty snow, her voice carrying across the quieted street. We were blinded. That monster Su Wai. We didn't know he was a traitor. We didn't know he was destroying the family. We were foolish, blind women. Please, forgive your mother. Come home. Help us. Your sisters are starving? Rua reached out, her fingers catching the edge of the slush near the horse's hooves. Brother, we are your flesh and blood. We signed that paper because we were tricked. We regret it every single day. Please don't leave us in the dark. They wept openly before thousands, stripping away every ounce of their noble dignity, begging the savage they had discarded to cast just a single glance of mercy upon them. They waited for him to rage. They waited for him to demand an explanation. They even waited for him to mock them. Anything would be better than the silence. Lin Feng sat atop his horse, perfectly motionless. He didn't tilt his head down. His eyes didn't track the movement of his biological mother's weeping form. His chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm. There was no hatred in his expression. There was no lingering resentment, no flash of vindication, no triumph. There was only a vast, hollow void. To Lin Feng, the three women kneeling in the dirt were not his family. They were not even his enemies. They were merely strangers insignifiants, obstacles, blocking an imperial. The declaration of severing relations, resting in his archive, wasn't just a legal document. It was the reality of his soul. His birth family had spent 17 years loving a lie, and in doing so, they had permanently erased their right to exist in his truth. Lin Feng didn't waste a single breath on them. He didn't say a word. Instead, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod to his flanks. Achuan and Han Sheng understood instantly. A cold, matching sneer crossed Achuan's face, while Han Sheng's expression turned utterly lethal. The two gang brothers spurred their horses forward. The heavy beasts aggressively crowded into the space, their iron-shod hooves forcing Madame Su and the sisters backward into the freezing slush. Han Sheng didn't draw a blade. He didn't need to. He simply leaned down from his saddle, his massive, armored frame casting a terrifying shadow over the three women. Move aside, beggars, Han Sheng rumbled, his voice carrying the terrifying weight of his underworld past. Imperial vanguard passing. Block the path of the commander again, and you will be executed for treason on the spot. Achuan coldly signaled the line guards. Clear the road. Keep the trash out of the avenue. The Imperial soldiers rushed forward, ruthlessly grabbing Madame Su and the two girls by their ragged cloaks, dragging them backward into the thick of the crowd, ignoring their frantic, heartbroken screams. Feng'er! No! Feng'er! Lin Feng's eyes never wavered. The moment the path was clear, he gently dug his heels into the flank of his stallion. Glop, glop, glomo, glop. The cavalry moved forward, the heavy hooves of thousands of horses instantly trampling over the spots in the snow where the Sioux women had just knelt, obliterating their tears beneath a sea of iron and mud. Lin Feng rode onward, passing through the grand, gilded gates of the imperial palace to take his place at the right hand of the future emperor completely, beautifully, and eternally untouchable. Behind him, in the freezing shadows of the capital slums, his biological family was left to rot, entirely consumed by the burning, suffocating realization of the dragon they had thrown away. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of the video. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe for more videos in the future. Comment below and let me know your thoughts. Your support helps the channel grow and is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one. Bye.